you so much, Shella, and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for having me. It's really wonderful to be here today. So Shella and I worked together many years ago with a consulting practice called the Center for Knowledge Societies in India. And a lot of our work focused on bringing social research methodologies to the design process, specifically designing new products and services in emerging economy contexts. And since then, I've had the opportunity to work in tech on urban mobility. So I worked with Uber as a researcher for a few years, building for their global markets in India, but also in Africa and Eastern Europe and the US and South America. After that, I worked in philanthropy with Fundación Botnar, which is a Swiss philanthropy where we focus on youth well-being in cities around the world. And with them, I helped design a leadership program for African mayors. And today I'm a consultant with UN Habitat, where I support their youth team or their human rights and social inclusion team, focusing on youth in urban governance, but also their innovation team, where my focus is on climate change and how we can support cities to address their climate change issues. Today, however, what I want to talk to you about is not so much work that relates to these experiences that I've had, but rather work that I have done out of the curiosity that I have about urbanism and cities. I've lived in many cities in India and around the world. Speaking to you from Nairobi today, in Kenya, which I know has a nice history of relationship with Oman, so it's kind of nice to to be speaking from here to the OTU group. The question that Shella posed was, how social and cultural studies are used in the professional world, and I've taken a somewhat open interpretation of what that is. So what I want to present to you today are sort of a few examples of cultural studies that I have done personally in my own practice that informs my professional work. And I think of them as what I'm calling inquiries. And what I'd like to do is just spend the next few minutes presenting them to you. I think of you as the professionals and the practitioners, and I'd love to sort of see how you respond to it. So I've titled my presentation today, Urban Inquiries in 3 Acts. And that's because I want to share with you 3 pieces of work that take you to a city, which is the national capital region of Delhi, including the city of Gurgaon, which I have called home for a long time now. It might not be what you were expecting and how you wanted to spend your Saturday afternoon, but I really hope that you enjoy it because I've really enjoyed putting it together for you. And with that, I'm going to begin. I will maybe switch my video off if that's possible. Okay, it doesn't matter. All right, so Act 1 is called The Public Lives of Gurgaon's Bathtubs. The Public Lives of Gurgaon's Bathtubs is a series of photographs accompanied by text that I produced. It first appeared in an online development magazine called Broken Toilets and was later featured in Guardian Cities. It's a piece that is very dear to me, and I thoroughly enjoy it, making it or continuing to work on it. And maybe you will enjoy it as much as I do. So let's begin with Act 1. Gurgaon, a relatively new and largely privately developed city just south of Delhi, is littered with bathtubs. They appear abandoned on sidewalks, under lone trees, beside shacks, found in piles of rubble left at intersections. Some bear the plastic marks of their previously protective covers. Others move location over time. Some are adopted by street vendors as storehouses for coconuts or firewood. In the famously privatized city of Gurgaon, the bathtub, a seemingly private object, takes on a particularly public dimension. As a resident of Gurgaon and a keen observer of how the city has developed and expanded over the last few decades, I've always found a quiet humor in the bathtubs. It's an inside joke that the city and I share. The bathtub is a motif in Gurgaon's landscape that probes questions about our culture of cleanliness, practices of real estate development, the inadequacies of natural resources and public goods, and the dialogue between lifestyles and livelihoods. How did so many bathtubs end up in Gurgaon in the first place? Gurgaon is a uniquely investor-driven city. According to Yogendra Desai, an architect with Unitech, one of Gurgaon's leading developers, approximately 70% of the city's residential real estate are investments to be rented out or sold for a profit. It isn't uncommon for an investor to buy 40 housing units at a time. The bathtub or jacuzzi increases their rental or resale value. To find out more about bathtubs in Gurgaon, I spoke with Jayanti Nadsalingam, an architect of high-end luxury housing. In her opinion, bathtubs are an epitome of luxury, but in her experience, few of her clients actually want one. A real estate agent I spoke with suggested that many developers originally installed bathtubs because of the growing expatriate community moving to Gurgaon for work. He added immediately after, "Lekin ab bathtub ka riwaj nahi raha," but we no longer have a tradition of bathtubs. Over the years, a surplus of housing coupled with poor public services and infrastructure has led to a fall in returns on investments. A greater number of people buying homes in Gurgaon are choosing to live in them, so they are ensuring they fit their lifestyles and needs. According to Yogendra, approximately 25% of end users replace the tiles, kitchen walls, or toilets provided by the developer with entirely new ones. As evident on Gurgaon streets, many also discard their bathtubs. Jayanti herself, this is the architect I spoke with, discarded two when she moved into her home. She gave them to a friend who ran a preschool and thought they might come in handy. Vibhuti Sachdeva, another architect I spoke with, also discarded the jacuzzi that came pre-fitted in her house. She gave it to her ironing man, or istriwala, who might, she presumes, have sold it forward. Bathtub installations are not sunk, but fitted on top, making them rather easy to remove, typically only once the construction and installation is already completed by the developer. One day, outside a villa just down the road from where I live in one of Gurgaon's gated communities, a bathtub appeared. It is a twin bathtub meant for two people to sit, facing one another as they soak. It has several water inlets and a motor at the bottom. It has yellowed, presumably from age, but is perfectly intact. Over the next few days or weeks, I walked past it every day, reveling in its presence and curiously imagining its future until one day it took on a life very different from that intended. When Rakhi and her husband bought their home in Gurgaon 8 years ago, it came with a bathtub in the living room. The twin tub had been bought to be installed, but had simply been left behind by the previous owner. Thinking it was too big to be installed in any of their bathrooms, Rakhi had it moved to her terrace, where it has remained ever since. Had it been used, she told me, I wouldn't have even kept it for a day. Since it was uninstalled, I thought of using it in some way. Many bathtubs in Gurgaon, whether installed or not, go unused. The most often cited reasons for their disuse include scarcity of water, lack of time, and inconvenience. Gurgaon's groundwater is found only as deep as 40 meters below the surface and is known to be hard, often leaving behind residual deposits on bathroom fittings and floors. Moreover, bathtub installations are seldom leak-proof, and it isn't unusual to find seepage on the other side of the bathroom wall in the adjoining room. A bathtub, a salesman I spoke with told me, are for short-term use. Log शौक पूरा करके निकाल देते हैं. People satisfy their desire and then discard the bathtubs. Rakhi humored me about my curiosity of bathtub behaviors. Speaking from experience, she called them out for being too much effort. In the winters, when she really longed for a hot soak, It would take her 3 geysers full to fill her bathtub to the right temperature. If she soaked herself in a bubble bath, she would have to shower afterwards. If she wanted music or candles or rose petals, she'd have to plan beforehand. There is a complete process that goes into using the bathtub, she said to me. Many developers building homes in Gurgaon are recognizing this waning desire to own a bathtub. Instead of pre-fitting houses with bathtubs, they now offer bare shell homes and apartments with concrete columns, block walls, the main utility lines, and nothing else. Some years ago, a developer sat directly with their buyers to design their homes through a campaign called Aapka Ghar, Aapki Marzi, your home, your way. These initiatives will potentially reduce the future population of discarded bathtubs. In the meantime, Gurgaon has many unwanted bathtubs, including Rakhi's, which after years of disuse was brought down to her front lawn to be disposed. Ruchika Sethi, a citizen activist who has been advocating for better waste management practices in the city, classifies bathtubs as inert waste. This includes most construction waste that isn't chemically or biologically reactive and will not decompose. Approximately 90% of it is recyclable through pulverizing activities that break it down into components that can be used in mixtures for wall tiles or non-load-bearing walls. The reason Ruchika says there is no information on where to dispose bathtubs or other construction waste for that matter is because there is no ultimate place of disposal. There are no recycling plants in the city, and the landfills are exhausted, leaving open dumping and burning as the only options. This is evident in the number of bathtubs strewn on the streets of Gurgaon. The bathtub, Ruchika said to me, is a dying object, and that it should die so publicly is a deserving requiem. And so as if it wasn't enough for these bathtubs to be on the roads and for me to have photographed them, I am now presenting it to an audience spread across the world. Now to Act 2, we want Justic. So this piece is a sound piece. It's something I produced for Sound Files, which is an exhibition hosted by the International Association of Women in Radio and Television. It was recorded quite some years ago after protests that followed a very brutal gang rape in the city of Delhi. This was in December 2012. The piece takes you into the world of 2 young girls, a world they respond to, a world of laughter, of language, of travel, of gender, of hierarchy, a world of family, of instructions, of places, of protest, of society, of frustration, but most importantly, of the multiple readings of one word, which is justice. So it's a sound piece. It's about 2 minutes long. And maybe what I would recommend is if you could just close your eyes and I will just play it for you.
2nd January 2013. After about 2 weeks of being an absent passenger of the Delhi metro, I was greeted with an unfamiliar sight this morning. In the spaces that are usually occupied by advertisements for condoms, sexually transmitted diseases, insurance, faster mobile and internet connectivity, there was nothing. Instead, at least in some of those spaces, written in black marker against blank white were the words, "We want Justic." It wasn't long before the family, consisting of 2 couples and their 4 young children, 3 girls and 1 boy, who were sitting next to and in front of me, noticed. The couple next to me commented on what they clearly saw as vandalism. The young boy, sitting opposite, quickly pointed out that the spelling of justice was wrong. This made him laugh, and when he pointed it out to his sisters, they laughed too. Soon enough, the 2 younger girls were reading out the words repeatedly. We want just two. We want just tea. We want just we want just tea. We want just we want just
So we want Justic. That was sounds from the Delhi Metro in India. And now to Act 3, Zamindari Zimmedari, or land ownership and responsibility. This piece was developed as part of Negotiating Roots residency at the Khoj International Artists Association. It's something I produced in collaboration with two other artists, Alex White Mazzarella and Soeb Grewal. It was a participatory community project where we worked with an urban village community to imagine the future of a contentious lake. I know Shella was just mentioning sort of oasis villages or oasis regions and areas. I think the city of Gurgaon, which this piece is again, it takes you back to the city of Gurgaon, has, I would say, a very similar history with villages built around lakes that have now been consumed by the city. And so let's go to Act 3. Located about 32 kilometers west of New Delhi, Gurgaon is the biggest hub of outsourcing companies in the world. In just 25 years, Gurgaon has grown from a cluster of villages to a millennium city, over 2 million people. This period of accelerated growth was driven by the private real estate sector, with landowners selling vast tracts of their agricultural land to builders of commercial and residential complexes. Today, the landscape of Gurgaon is a complex mix of state-of-the-art businesses, parks, shopping malls, golf courses, and gated residential complexes, with several old village settlements in the midst of these new constructions. The Gurgaon model of development is being replicated in new urban spaces across the country. However, the Millennium City's viability beyond its short-term boom is already being questioned, specifically its environmental, social, and cultural sustainability. While Gurgaon attracts white-collar workers from across the country to the many Fortune 500 companies based here, the city also has a large share of rural migrant labor employed in lower-level service sector jobs. Friction between these increasingly disparate economic classes is becoming more evident and is perpetuated in the exclusivity of urban space and privatization of land. Common space is needed to help create and establish a collective social life and include diverse Gurgaon residents as active citizens. In Tigra, which is the village that we were working in Tigra, agricultural land belonging to its residents was acquired by the government or sold to private developers nearly 20 years ago. Even though Tigra is today an urban village, many families continue to maintain rural livelihoods, farming on land now several miles away or herding cattle for their milk. Tigra's population also consists of rural migrants from across northern India who work in Gurgaon's high rises and rent tenement rooms from Tigra's landowning residents. Our activity is focused on Tigra's Baba Ram Mohan Johar, or lake. Believed to be sacred for its water, the seasonal lake is located at the center of the village. The lake has dried up as a result of the deterioration of monsoon rainwater channels and the subsequent drop in groundwater levels in the surrounding areas. Some areas of the lake bed have been reclaimed as land for the construction of a community center. In the year that we did this particular project, the community center had been under construction for 3 years and had yet to be used. The incumbent ward councillor, the elected representative of this village, was part of the newly formed local government body, the Municipal Corporation of Gurgaon. And she had proposed to build a boundary wall along the circumference of the lake to secure it from any further encroachment. Having just barely defeated Tigra's candidate by just 3 votes, her proposal had a bleak future. It is especially opposed by a group of 3 village elders who were the self-appointed Village Development Committee. Our discussions with the residents, which is what you see here in this photograph, it's I would say a focus group discussion that we conducted with the residents. Our discussions with residents revealed various opinions for future uses of the lake bed. Some believed what was left of the lake should be used as grazing land for cattle. Others held that it should be converted into a park for children. Some imagined an old age home on it. Others believed it should be restored as a seasonal water source. And still others wanted to see it as a parking lot for the community center. Villagers also offered stories about the lake's history going back 7 generations. They discussed its sacredness to believers and its use as a playground by children. One woman mentioned how the lake was perhaps punishing the village for its degradation. The lake, she said, or the house of God, was beautiful, but now it was doomed, not because of the water, but because of the wayward world and its bad deeds. The village, she thought, could not find happiness without it. We invited village residents to the community center for a dialogue about public space. The day-long activities included a video screening, a film of Tigra residents recollecting their stories of the Baba Ram Mohan Johar, an installation, a viewing of public art, and a dialogue on imagining the future of the lake. Invitations were printed out and hand-delivered door-to-door the day before. A provocative question about land ownership, framed as a play on words, was printed on large pieces of paper and placed in the lake bed for Tigra's residents' interpretation. The words zamindari and zimmedari translate roughly to land ownership and responsibility in Hindi, and present an open-ended exploration of civic values in Gurgaon, a city that is increasingly facing water, land management, and ecological challenges. A series of land artworks also occupied the lake bed, the figure of a cow to indicate the lake's role as a grazing ground and bathing area for dairy cows and buffaloes, which about 60% of the village still owned. The ancient and auspicious Hindu symbol of the swastika, representing the lake as a holy place for pilgrimage, and a rain cloud representative of the reservoir's role in collecting monsoon rainwater. The roof of the community center served as a viewing gallery for the land art and also as a space for continuing dialogue on the revitalization of the lake. A groundwater collection installation which is what you see here in this photograph, was created to explore how water from rooftops across the village could be channeled into the lake. While the objective of these dialogues was to envision how best to secure the lake's future and prevent encroachment, the actual conversation revolved around politics, power structures, and class divisions that govern the village. Despite having designated a time slot during the day exclusively for women to join in the dialogue, none of them participated. Also conspicuously absent from the day's events were the 3 village elders from the Village Development Committee. In the evening, a second projection of the film featuring residents recollecting their stories of the Baba Ram Mohan Johar took place at a centrally located street corner to which the Village Development Committee were especially invited, and they attended. An open forum to discuss and critique the various views that were presented in the film followed the screening. During this conversation, Deepak and a group of young adults presented an idea they had been discussing for the community space, to build an akhada, or a traditional wrestling arena. Haryana, which is the state in which Tigra is located, is known for its tradition of pehelwani, or wrestling. The young man decided to self-organize to bring an akhada to the community. An akhada is a gymnasium or a wrestling arena central to the social fabric of martial communities in northern India. While the form is physical, it also embodies a deeper spiritual aspect. Each day, a mound of earth is dampened with water and dug up to replace the tough topsoil. This work is performed religiously with fixed rites, one elder passing the shovel to the next. The space embodies collectivism in usage and custodianship, and both the space and activity are inclusive. Within the wrestling circle, all are equal, and the practitioners don't observe caste distinctions. The camaraderie here is palpable and helps in promoting the neutrality of the space in an otherwise politically divided environment. According to Deepak, who is the young man you just met in the photograph before, a truckload of dirt, a bag of almonds, and an image of Lord Hanuman, which is what you see in this photograph here, is all you need to build an akhada. Tigra's akhada was opened with only the basic infrastructure required to begin a wrestling practice. It will be formalized over time with the community contributing to its development. The akhada is a structure that requires very little initial financial investment and allows for the easy testing of new design ideas. In this incremental approach, each new design element is added out of necessity. Here, users of the space are its designers and must negotiate their different visions. Since the akhada is made by the people who use it, community investment is central to its sustenance. The sense of collective ownership and work in the akhada builds intimacy between people and the space. At its core, the akhada is a form of community-driven urban design and planning. Although pehelvani or wrestling and other similar sports such as boxing have been traditionally male-dominated sports, there is a strong and growing space for women to participate and excel in them. The village of Bhiwani, also in Haryana, not too far away from Tigra or Gurgaon, is, for example, a popular training ground for Haryanvi women boxers, and many families from villages across the state will send their daughters to Bhiwani to train competitively. And today we are seeing good representation of Indian women in international games for wrestling and boxing and weightlifting. We came to Tigra intent on questioning existing power structures that limit imagination and activation of public space here: age, caste, land ownership, and gender. The result of our work was that a group of Tigra's young men organized to build the temporary akhada. The akhada is a space that is familiarly associated with inclusivity, although perhaps limited in this case to caste identity and land ownership, as it was still not inclusive of gender. Given that the akhada was built in the public space of the community center, a sphere of Tigra's village life that observedly excludes women, and also that our dialogues were largely with men, both young and old, this outcome is not surprising. What emerged was an understanding that any instance of community art or social practice or participatory urban design of this sort, the akhada is also a wrestling space for the articulation of existent and potential or emergent community relationships, including that of ours and the community that we were working with. So that's the story of Tigra, and that's the end of the 3 acts. I will now stop sharing my screen and very happy for your responses or questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Namrata. That was a very, very interesting presentation. I think we can open the floor to everybody in the audience. I think, if you have any questions or opinions to share. But I mean, I guess if I just want to kick things off a bit, I found it quite interesting about how you sort of took, this explored the idea of the cultural landscape, and like in the first act with the bathtubs, you took sort of this piece of the landscape and try to keep interpreting it in these different contexts and how it keeps evolving. I think it's also quite curious because in Oman as well, I kept having this sort of comparative analysis of what I myself personally keep observing is these discarded sofas, and that they are always used by people in the community, mostly kids or just, anybody who's just walking by to just use it in whatever manner, play with it or just to keep it as a part of the streetscape. They almost like maintain it as part of the streetscape. And so it's quite interesting how you can take a piece of cultural, or like it becomes a form of the cultural landscape, even if it's, not meant to be that in the first place. How did you like? Did you see that this sort of idea resonated as you kept going through your career? Like, I know that this was more of an artist project, and you were trying to just imagine the role of the bathtubs in the cities. But the idea of this cultural landscape and all the elements that play a part of the whole city life and community life, did that ever come back in any form in your experiences?
I mean, I think for me, in this particular instance, a lot of it is about the relationship between, say, individual humans, like sort of communities, and objects, like specific objects. And I think the question of objects and the relationship between people and objects, it comes up again and again and again. For example, with a lot of the work that I was doing with, for example, public transport, or I wouldn't say public transport, but sort of ride-hailing transportation, right? Whether that's a taxi that you can book on an app, or a bus service that you can book on an app. I think a lot of it is about observing how people interact with those physical objects, and whether that's physical space or whether that's a mobile application on your phone. And so for me, I find that yes, that aspect of understanding people and their relationship with objects around them and how they use it comes up again and again. And the one that I like specifically in the context of urban design is this idea of desire paths, right? Where you have roads, and then you'll have like the actual path that cuts across the path, which is the one that most people will take.
Right.
And so I think you see that over and over and over again. I find that is a particularly interesting aspect of the relationship between people and their physical space, whether that's, like a city or an object, or a digital service like Zoom, like we're using right now. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
And just yeah, I mean, another example to share of, picking up sort of these things that we see in our urban landscapes, like sofas, right? Like you have no idea what story that's going to tell you, if you just chose to ask and sort of trace that back to where it was. Or it might suggest a reflection of a certain kind of desire for how to use public space. And then there's aspects of sort of waste that I think come into the picture, which is also with case of bathtubs. I know this sofa thing is also quite common in New York, where you'll see a lot of discarded sofas on the streets there. But I had a colleague, Molly Stevens, and then she lived in China for quite some time, and she saw that there was a culture of sort of sleeping in public that she found quite interesting, And so I think, especially when you're in places that you might not be familiar with, or you see things that are out of place, it's a really good trigger to ask, why is this happening? And then to just chase that story down.
Very true. Actually, I even find it quite interesting that even with the OTU, what we're trying to do, and we kind of struggle to still define, and that's kind of a goal right now, is how can we take these cultural experiences and manifest them in design and planning, because somewhere, especially in Oman, we find that there is this sort of a separation between the cultural experience and what is planned as an experience. And so there's a lot of debate and discussion about that. So I mean, I guess it's always interesting then to chase down these things that are floating in the background, but they actually make up our experiences of a place. Like I would think that that a sofa or a bathtub, is like evokes a sense of, ownership. Is it waste? Is it a part of the community? Is it important to the people who have been using this or appropriating it for themselves, and why? And all of this maybe can help, even professionals, not just see it, not just see these cultural experiences as background information, and how do you actively make it as part of the design and the process is, it's quite interesting to
Yeah.
think about.
Even in the case of the bathtubs, right? Like you can see that there's a shift between developers saying, okay, here's what we're going to give everybody, because that's their, their maybe their research tells them that, okay, there's a growing international community that's going to live here. And then like over the years, you see that change and it's no longer the case, so you can see that there is, when you begin to receive this kind of feedback, I mean, bathtubs on the road are a form of feedback that developers or architects would be receiving. And so you begin to adapt to that as well. Yeah.
Any questions from anybody in the audience? Manar, Reem, Tuna, Asma, Brian, if you have anything to share, please unmute yourselves and ask away. I know that Asma is doing an interesting thesis in her hometown of Sur, where she's actually trying to now negotiate this idea of traditional settlements and cultural lifestyles and the newer developments and how they are, sort of integrating culture or not, because it's in a place of her own. Asma, do you have anything to share about your work or anything you saw today?
Uh, uh, yeah, thank you, Shahla. Thank you for this presentation. My name is Asma Al-Ma'mari. I am from Sur, and I'm doing my thesis about subject about sense of place in famous public places here in Sur. And those places are now famous because it's the newest places here in Oman. It's Al-Aija Bridge and the Sur Corniche. It's also about how people feel about these public spaces. And actually now I'm distributing my questionnaires and I'm doing my interviews, but it's really interesting to know how do people feel about these public spaces within Omanis or expatriates. So I really have an interesting fact about people who how to interact with these public spaces. Actually, I like some of Hindi people. They always meeting each other in a specific place at our souk, and they like to watch watch something, something like channel specific. I think it's famous channel in India, but I don't know, because always when I'm going to the souk, I'm seeing them that a lot of them they are meeting each other, seeing this channel, but I don't know what they are watching. So when she presenting how people watching film and how they are gathering and seeing this relationship to the places, I think this kind of relationship would be for a long time. And I think this...
Tell me again.
Sorry?
Go on, Asma. I think it was just somebody's mic was on, but you can
Okay.
continue.
Okay. This is one. The other thing is when I'm going to the souk, I see some part of Indian people. They are like a specific place because they have lived there for more than 20 years. Their families and the grandfather is here in Sur. So
Right.
I'll just, yeah, so it's really amazing to know that there are many people like Sur, and they left they only going to India in just for long holidays only, but there are like they think that Sur is like their second home. So it's really interesting to know about this fact, and the presentation is showing that there are a lot of culture that try to connect between two places, two different places, but this relationship is those people who really act with these places.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's quite interesting about why we have to investigate spaces in this ethnographic manner, like really deep diving and talking to people, not just seeing who are the users of the spaces, who are the actors even, but also how they connect with these supposedly public private spaces. And I think, as far as I know, Soul is not like not like Muscat. It's not meant to be like a major bustling hub or cosmopolitan center, but it is going there. It is heading towards that future. And I think, as a resident of that town, when you start to explore and observe and talk to the different people, is when you start to realize that there is such a deep relationship, and how those relationships build up and why, and is very important to include that in before trying to respond to something that you think is a problem or could be a problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Asma. It was very interesting and nice to see that you're going through that process.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
Uh,
thank you. It's very interesting, actually. It's very interesting, and I hope we have a lot of this study here in Oman.
Inshallah, yeah, yes. I mean, definitely with this approach, like I don't know if Namrata is aware, but I guess in Oman, this sort of approach to deep diving into culture for design process is not common. In fact, I feel like OTU is constantly trying to push that idea forward. And when it's slowly taking foot, that yes, community engagement is so important, and why it's important is still to be answered. Like, I mean, maybe it's obvious to you and me, but it's very hard for, say, when your usual top down approach is, okay, we need to make this place future ready, so we just do what we think is progressive without going into what the community needs. So this sort of an approach is bottom up. So then the community
Yeah.
is actually talking about and able to communicate its values. Anyone else, where would you like to share any ideas, opinions about this approach, and how, especially in the professional world, how do you really take it forward?
Mm.
I think uh, Reem or Manar, would you like to share any ideas, opinions? It's a small crowd. Okay. Well, I think that's, I mean, I'm not going to force anybody, but Namrata, is there any, final comments you'd like to share with everybody who's aspiring to take this into the urban planning and design future?
I mean, I think one thing that's been quite top of my mind is, I mean, okay, for the last more than a decade, sort of been working with this user research or human-centered design approach, which I think there's, I mean, it has its limitations, but I think it's actually immensely valuable in creating, to some extent, a participatory approach, right? Like how much decision-making capacity you actually give to the people you're designing for. I think that varies, and it can often be a more political aspect of how decisions are made. But increasingly, I'm seeing that there's a need to sort of shift away from a user research-led approach or a human-centered design approach to something that's more systems focused. Because I think with issues that are far more complex than just building public space, but how that relates to, I mean, you mentioned migration when I think we were speaking earlier, but issues around climate change, I just think that we need to kind of expand beyond just simple user research methodologies and getting that input and feedback to actually then beginning to map out how certain decisions will impact other aspects of people's lives or urban space or the environment and so on. So I definitely see, at least for myself in my own work, a shift towards thinking a little bit more holistically. Although I still very much am rooted in in processes of design research and design thinking. So so that's a little bit on my mind right now.
Actually, yeah, and it's good that you put that forward, because I think here in Oman, we're still trying to also think of before user research even begins, it's like people are trying to push it back and say, no, it's not that required, or it's good for an opinion survey or something like that. But I would think, like, if topics get more complex, and as they are obviously in a more complex world, how do we still keep the people's perspective embedded in that? Because it's always easy to say, okay, you know what, this is almost too complex for people to deal with. They will mostly deal with what interests them, but actually what interests them is exactly, it's so complex already. Maybe they're not able to communicate that complexity either to themselves or to the person who's going to transform their urban futures. So, is there still a sort of mainstream process which makes sure that people's ideas and perceptions, etc., are still well embedded in the process of these complex problems and projects that are, like even for climate change resilience, or maybe for some other topics? Do you feel that is it shifting, or is it just evolving in itself?
I think it plays out really differently in different places. I mean, I think there's a lot of community-based work. So, for example, a few organizations or like one organization at least that I've had some early experience in is an organization called Urbs, and their focus is what they call user-generated cities. And their practice is based across Bombay, India, Switzerland, and now Colombia. And I think a lot of their work is driven by bringing sort of the tools and techniques of design directly to the community that is doing the building or is sort of reimagining their own physical space. And I think they go well beyond the surveys, and you'll see, like, even with the last act the Act 3 that I shared, yes, we had like a focus group discussion kind of setting in this lake bed where we were asking questions, getting to learn a little bit more about how people were thinking. But you kind of go beyond that to start building possibilities, right? So whether it's like a model for a rainwater harvesting system, or like, like just a mound of mud that could represent a wrestling ring, right? People begin to get ideas for what that's like. So I know, for example, Herbs did some work in Geneva where they were looking at sort of rebuilding a beachfront or a lakefront, I would say. And it was deeply participatory in nature, where you had people come in and draw out their visions of what this could be, using drawings, using sort of postcards, like doing it in groups, bringing in different language groups that are represented within the city and so on. So I think there are different ways of doing it. And I do think that architects and urban designers and designers in general have the creative tools. It's just a matter of knowing. And in some ways, I guess that's what I mean, that's one of the things that I think about a lot when I present, this work, rather than the more methodologically rigorous research that I would do professionally, is that I think they have equal, like they're equally valuable, you know, just because it's not a traditional survey doesn't mean that it doesn't bring that value to it. And I think there is a practice of like art-based research and participatory research that goes beyond very traditional research methodologies that I think are quite useful. I mean, I think Switzerland is an interesting place to look at because it's very democratic in that every plan that's made in the city, a building that comes up, has to be voted upon, you know, so that's just a very different culture, and that might not be the case in countries like India or Oman or Kenya. But I think there are examples everywhere. Or if you look, like even at the US, if you look at the kind of work that Sidewalk Labs is doing, you know, they use a very heavy sort of user research, private sector built tech industry built methodology, but to design urban spaces, you know. So I think there's different examples around the world of how people are doing it. And I think a lot of that is also determined culturally.
True, very true. Okay, so with that, I guess I will wrap up this session. Thank you so much, really, for your time, and really just such an interesting presentation. I know that you kept saying that I hope it's enough, I hope it's good, but it was really awesome. I really loved it, and I think everybody in the audience loved it too. So thanks again, Namrata, and thank you all of the people in this audience.
Thank you so much, Shella, and everyone at Oman Think Open. Yeah, thanks so much.